The dinner party in our Tribeca loft was perfect. The crystal was polished, the laughter was easy, and my wife, Elena, looked radiant in the candlelight. It only took 3 seconds for that perfection to shatter. A phone left face up on the marble island, a single notification, and a name that didn't belong in our life. I didn't smash the glass in my hand. Instead, I poured her another drink and smiled. Because sometimes, the loudest scream is the one you never let out. If stories about the quiet, terrifying unraveling of a marriage intrigue you, stay with me, because the silence is just beginning. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Tribeca loft showed a man who had everything. Julian Vance adjusted his cufflinks, smoothing the fabric of his dress shirt as he surveyed the living room. It was a masterpiece of modern design, his design. The architectural lines were clean, the lighting was warm and amber, and the low hum of jazz mingled effortlessly with the polite laughter of 12 guests. It was a Tuesday, a celebratory dinner for closing the Hudson Yards contract, but it felt like a performance. Julian caught the eye of his wife, Elena, across the room. She was holding a flute of champagne, laughing at a joke made by Roger, one of the gallery investors. She wore the emerald silk dress he had bought her for their anniversary last month. The fabric clung to her frame, moving like water as she shifted her weight. She looked magnificent. She looked happy. Julian felt a surge of affection so sharp it almost hurt. 10 years. They had built this life brick by brick, surviving the lean years of his startup and the chaotic years of her gallery climbing. They were the couple people envied, the ones who hadn't let the city grind them down. Julian, the wine is breathing a little too well, Marcus called out from the dining table, holding up an empty bottle of the Barolo. Coming, Julian said, his voice calm, practiced. He moved toward the kitchen island to grab the reserve bottle. Elena's phone was sitting there on the cool Carrara marble, face up, next to the hors d'oeuvres tray. It was a sleek, innocuous rectangle of glass and metal. As Julian reached for the corkscrew, the phone screen lit up. It wasn't a call. It was a text message. The banner notification sliced through the dim lighting of the kitchen, bright and undeniable. Sender, Lucas. Can't wait to have you in my bed again tomorrow. The meeting is just an excuse. Wear the red lace. The world didn't stop. The jazz didn't cut out. The laughter in the living room didn't cease. But for Julian, the air was suddenly sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum that pulled at his chest, collapsing his lungs. He stared at the words. Lucas. He knew a Lucas. Lucas Thorne. The venture capitalist Elena had been consulting with for the upcoming digital art exhibit. A man 10 years younger than Julian, with a sharp jawline and a reputation for aggressive acquisitions. In my bed again. Again. The word echoed in Julian's mind, bouncing off the pristine white walls. Again implied a history. Again meant this wasn't a drunk mistake at a holiday party. Again meant routine. Julian's hand hovered over the corkscrew. His fingers were numb. He felt a strange, detached sensation, as if he were floating above his own body, watching a man discover his life was a lie. The physiological reaction was delayed but violent. A cold sweat broke out at the base of his spine, and his heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Julian, everything okay in there? It was Elena's voice. Sweet, familiar. The voice that had whispered vows to him in a vineyard in Napa. The voice that had promised forever. Julian blinked, forcing the room to come back into focus. He looked up. Elena was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, her silhouette framed by the soft light. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners in that way he adored. She didn't know. She didn't know the screen was lit up behind him. Fine, Julian said. The word felt like gravel in his throat. He cleared it. Just fighting with the cork. Elena walked over, the silk of her dress swishing softly. She smelled of jasmine and expensive wine, the scent of his home. She reached past him, her arm brushing against his sleeve, burning him like a brand, and picked up her phone. She tapped the screen. Julian watched her face in the reflection of the oven door. For a split second, less than a heartbeat, her expression faltered. Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parted. It was a micro-expression of panic. Then, just as quickly, the mask slid back into place. She swiped the notification away, locked the phone, and slid it into the hidden pocket of her dress. "I need to check on the catering for tomorrow," she said, turning to him. Her voice was steady, perfect. "Lucas texted about the venue change." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost elegant. "Is that right?" Julian asked. He turned to face her, the bottle of Barolo in his hand acting as an anchor. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the slight flush on her chest, the brightness in her eyes. He had thought it was the wine. Now he knew it was the adrenaline of deceit. "Yeah, he's a nightmare about logistics," she laughed lightly, reaching out to straighten his collar. Her fingers lingered on his neck. "You okay? You look pale." "Long day," Julian lied. "Go feed the guests," she said, pecking him on the cheek. Her lips felt cold. "I love you." "I know," he said. He didn't say, "I love you too." She didn't notice. She spun around and floated back to the party, the perfect hostess, leaving Julian alone in the kitchen with the expensive wine and the ruins of his marriage. He should have followed her. He should have dragged her into the bedroom and demanded the truth. He should have thrown the phone against the wall. That's what a man does in the movies. He screams. He fights. But Julian Vance was an architect. He understood structure. He understood that if you pull a load-bearing wall out without preparation, the whole house collapses on top of you. He gripped the neck of the wine bottle until his knuckles turned white. The anger was there, a molten pit in his stomach. But sitting on top of it was something colder, sharper. It was the shock of realization that the woman he had slept beside for a decade was a stranger. Wear the red lace. He knew that set. He had bought it for her in Paris 3 years ago. She hadn't worn it for him in over a year. She had told him it scratched. Julian uncorked the bottle. The pop sounded like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. He poured the wine into a decanter, watching the dark red liquid swirl, aerating, breathing. He walked back into the living room. "Here we are," Julian announced, his voice steady, his smile tight but convincing. He poured the wine for his friends. He laughed at the right moments. He held Elena's hand when she told a story about their trip to Cabo. He played the part of the doting husband, all while his mind was replaying the last 6 months of his life, recontextualizing every late night, every business trip, every time she had turned away from him in bed, claiming a headache. Later that night, after the guests had gone, and the dishwasher was humming its rhythmic cycle, they lay in bed. The city lights filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of shadow across the duvet. Elena was scrolling on her phone, her back to him. "Good night, Julian," she whispered, turning off her lamp. "Good night," he said into the darkness. He lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The space between them, in the king-sized bed, felt like a canyon. He could hear her breathing, slow and even. She fell asleep quickly, unburdened by guilt, secure in her secret. Julian didn't sleep. He lay motionless, the silence of the room pressing down on him. He realized then that he had a choice. He could wake her up and blow up their lives tonight. Or he could wait. He could watch. He could make sure that when the house finally fell, he wasn't the one standing inside it. He closed his eyes, but the image of the text message burned behind his lids. He didn't say a word, not yet. The morning sun hit the Tribeca loft with the same aggressive brightness it always did, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For Julian, however, the light felt clinical, like an interrogation lamp. He sat at the kitchen island, a cooling cup of espresso in front of him, watching Elena make toast. It had been 3 days since the text message. 3 days of a performance that deserved an Academy Award. "Do you have the time?" Elena asked, not looking up from her plate. She was buttering the sourdough with precision, the knife scraping loudly against the crust. 8:15, Julian replied. His voice sounded normal. It terrified him how easy it was to sound normal. She nodded, taking a bite. "I'll be late tonight. The installation for the hazy light exhibit is running behind. The artists are being divas." "Okay," Julian said. He turned the page of his newspaper, though he hadn't read a single word. "Do you need me to order dinner?" "No, I'll grab something with the team. Don't wait up." She stood up and walked over to him. She leaned in to kiss him, a habitual, reflexive peck on the lips. Julian didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. He held his breath, waiting for the contact to end. When she pulled back, she smiled, but her eyes didn't linger. They darted to the countertop where her phone lay face down. She snatched it up. "Oh, hey," Julian said, keeping his tone casual, the rhythm of his heartbeat thudding in his ears. "Can I see that photo of the Hudson Yards render I sent you last week? I deleted mine by accident, and I need to reference the elevation." It was a test. A small, cruel test. Elena froze. It was subtle. A tensing of the shoulders, a hesitation in her step. "Now? I'm rushing, Julian." "It takes 2 seconds. Just unlock it." She looked at him, her grip on the phone tightening. "I'll email it to you when I get to the gallery. I have to go." "Elena," he said softly. She stopped. "The passcode is 1014. Our anniversary. Just unlock it and hand it to me." She stared at him, her expression hardening just enough to be noticeable. "I changed it," she said, her voice clipped. "You changed it?" "Security update. The gallery IT guy said we needed stronger passwords for client confidentiality. It's a whole thing." She laughed, but the sound was brittle. "I'll email you the photo. Bye, babe." She turned and walked out the door. The heavy click of the lock, engaging, echoed through the open space. Julian sat alone in the silence. Security update. He stood up and walked to the window, watching her figure emerge onto the street below. She hailed a cab. She didn't look up at their apartment. That evening, Julian didn't order dinner. He sat in the living room with the lights off, waiting. At 10:45 p.m., the lock turned. Elena entered. She looked immaculate, despite claiming to have been wrangling artists for 12 hours. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was fresh. "Hey," she said, startled by his presence in the dark. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" "Just thinking," Julian said. "How was the installation?" "Exhausting, dusty, a nightmare." She dropped her bag on the chair. Julian inhaled. The air shifted as she moved past him. There was no dust. There was no smell of the gallery's distinct industrial cleaner. Instead, there was a faint, lingering scent of an expensive cologne, sandalwood and citrus, that definitely wasn't his. And beneath that, the smell of soap. Not their soap. "I'm going to jump in the shower," she announced, moving quickly toward the bedroom. "I feel gross." "You showered before you left this morning," Julian noted. "I told you it was dusty." He listened as the bathroom door closed. The lock clicked. A moment later, the shower started. Julian walked to the bedroom door. He stood there, leaning his forehead against the cool wood. He could hear the water hitting the tiles. He imagined her in there, scrubbing her skin, washing away the evidence of Lucas Thorne. She wasn't washing off dust. She was washing off guilt. She was resetting her body to come back to his bed. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just cheating. She was erasing him. Every time she changed that passcode, Every time she showered the second she got home, she was compartmentalizing their marriage into a box she could close at will. Julian walked back to the living room. He picked up his iPad and opened his banking app. He didn't smash anything. He didn't scream. He simply navigated to the joint savings account and stared at the balance. Then, he opened a new tab and searched. Divorce attorneys, Manhattan, asset protection. The water in the shower stopped. Julian closed the tab, set the iPad down, and poured himself a glass of water. When Elena walked out, wrapped in a towel, smelling of their lavender body wash, he looked at her and smiled. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much," she said. "Good," Julian replied. "I'm glad." He watched her walk to the vanity. The performance continued, but the audience had changed. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was the witness. Rain in Manhattan didn't wash things clean. It just made everything slick and harder to hold on to. Julian sat in the back of a black car, the wipers slicing back and forth with a rhythmic, hypnotic thud. He was parked across the street from the St. Regis, a place far too expensive for a casual client strategy meeting, yet exactly the kind of place Elena would choose if she wanted to feel expensive. Earlier that afternoon, she had sent a text. Meeting with the board ran late, grabbing a quick bite with the team at a deli, then heading back to the office to finish the proposal. Don't wait up. The Find My app on Julian's phone, which they had shared for years for safety, told a different story. The blue dot hadn't moved to her office. It had hovered over East 55th Street for 2 hours. "Sir, we can't sit here forever," the driver grumbled, eyeing the doorman through the windshield. "Keep the meter running," Julian said, handing him a $50 bill. "I'm just waiting for a colleague." He wasn't waiting. He was watching. 10 minutes later, the revolving doors of the hotel spun, spilling golden light onto the wet pavement. Julian felt his stomach tighten, a physiological rejection of what his eyes were about to see. Elena walked out. She wasn't with the team. She wasn't with the board. She was with Lucas. They stood under the hotel awning, sheltered from the rain. To a passerby, they might have looked like two professionals finishing a deal, but Julian knew his wife's body language better than he knew the blueprints of his own buildings. He saw the way she leaned into Lucas, her center of gravity shifting entirely toward him. He saw the way her hand lingered on the lapel of Lucas's coat, fingers brushing the fabric with a familiarity that made Julian's skin crawl. Lucas said something. Julian couldn't hear it through the rain and the glass, but he saw Elena laugh. It wasn't her polite gallery director laugh. It was the deep, throw-your-head-back laugh she used to save for him on Sunday mornings. Then the moment fractured. Lucas stepped closer, closing the gap between them. He reached out, cupping Elena's face with one hand. She didn't pull away. She didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. She melted into it. They kissed. It wasn't a tentative goodbye. It was a hungry, possessive claim. It was a kiss that erased 10 years of marriage in 10 seconds. It was a kiss that said, "I know you, I want you, and nothing else matters." Julian watched from the darkness of the car. He didn't blink. He felt a strange, icy calm settle over him, freezing the rage that had been bubbling in his gut for days. The uncertainty was gone. The maybe it's just flirting, the maybe I misunderstood the text, all of it evaporated. The truth was a physical thing now, heavy and undeniable. Elena pulled back, smiling up at Lucas with a look of adoration that Julian hadn't received in years. Lucas opened a taxi door for her. She slid in. He didn't follow. They were being careful, playing the game. Lucas watched her cab drive off, then turned and walked back into the hotel, adjusting his collar. "Follow that taxi," Julian said. "The one the lady got in, the driver asked. No, Julian corrected himself, his voice devoid of emotion. Take me home. Take the long way. He didn't need to follow her. He knew where she was going. She was going back to their loft to wash the scent of another man off her skin, to crawl into their bed, and to lie to his face one more time. As the car merged into the traffic, Julian looked out at the blurred city lights. The grief was there, sharp and jagged, but something else was rising to meet it. Strategy. He wasn't a husband anymore. He was an architect surveying a condemned building. He wouldn't scream. He wouldn't fight for her. You don't fight for a structure that is already rotting from the inside. You demolish it. You just have to make sure you control the blast radius. Julian unlocked his phone. He didn't check her location. Instead, he opened his calendar and marked the date. Tuesday, October 14th. The St. Regis. Confirmed. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and leaned his head back against the seat, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. The silence inside the car was deafening, but it was the only thing he had left. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Rockefeller Center felt less like a place of law and more like an operating theater. The air was scrubbed clean, the glass table was freezing to the touch, and the view of the Empire State Building offered no comfort. Julian sat across from Harlan Gray, a man whose suits cost more than most people's cars and whose reputation for equitable distribution was terrifyingly efficient. New York is an equitable distribution state, Julian, not a community property state, Harlan said, sliding a thick file across the glass. That means the court divides assets fairly, not necessarily equally, but fairness is a subjective concept. We need to define it before she does. Julian looked at the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words looked foreign, like a language he had never studied but was now forced to speak fluently. The loft in Tribeca? Harlan asked, pen hovering. I bought it before the marriage, but we renovated it with joint funds, Julian replied. His voice was dry, devoid of the tremor that had been there 3 days ago. She picked the marble. I designed the layout. We'll argue the appreciation is yours. What about the accounts? I've started moving my personal liquidity into a separate holding, small increments. Nothing that triggers a red flag with the bank or her notifications. Harlan nodded, impressed. Good. You're thinking clearly. Most men in your position are too busy drinking or screaming to protect their portfolio. Now, the most important part, you cannot leave the marital home. Not yet. If you leave, you cede ground. You have to stay there, sleep in that bed, and be the husband she thinks she has. I know, Julian said, and no confrontations. If she suspects you know, she lawyers up. If she lawyers up first, we lose the element of surprise. You need to be a ghost, Julian. Present, but transparent. Julian signed the retainer agreement. The scratch of the pen was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. He wasn't just ending a marriage. He was dismantling a history. Every signature felt like he was erasing a memory. The honeymoon in Bali, the Christmas they got the dog, the Sunday mornings with the New York Times, all of it was being converted into numbers on a spreadsheet. When Julian returned to the loft that evening, the air felt heavy. Elena was on the sofa, her legs tucked under her, scrolling through her iPad. She looked up and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that would have melted him a week ago. Now, it just looked like a biological reflex. You're late again, she said softly. Everything okay with the Hudson Yards project? Just permit issues, Julian lied. The lie rolled off his tongue like oil. City Hall is dragging its feet. He walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. He didn't offer her one. I was thinking, Elena said, putting the iPad down. My birthday is coming up. Maybe we could do a weekend in the Berkshires. Just the two of us. Disconnect for a bit. Julian turned to look at her. The audacity of it took his breath away. She wanted to play happy couple in the woods while texting Lucas from the bathroom. She wanted the safety of her husband while craving the danger of her lover. He looked at her neck, imagining Lucas's hands there. He felt a wave of nausea, but he forced it down, locking it away in the same mental box where he kept the lawyer's business card. "That sounds nice," Julian said, his face a blank canvas. "Let me check my schedule." "You need a break, Julian. You've been so distant lately." "I'm just tired, Elena." He wasn't tired. He was wide awake. He was calculating the equity of the apartment, the value of the art on the walls, and the cost of his own dignity. He walked past her, his hand brushing the back of the sofa, but avoiding her skin. "I'm going to finish up some emails in the study," he said. He closed the study door and locked it. He didn't open his work email. He opened a new folder on his laptop labeled Project Exit. He began to upload the screenshots of the texts, the timeline of her late nights, and the photo of the St. Regis Hotel entrance. He was building a case. She was planning a birthday trip. Let her plan, he thought. Let her think she's safe. The velvet box sat on the dining table like a landmine. It was small, navy blue, and innocent in appearance. But Julian knew the detonation it contained would be internal. It was Elena's 35th birthday. The apartment was quiet, the city outside a low hum of traffic and sirens, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Julian's chest. He had bought the gift months ago, before the text message, before the St. Regis, before he became a man who tracked his wife's location on a map. Elena emerged from the bedroom, dressed in a sleek black trench coat over a cocktail dress. She looked restless, checking her watch, her body angled toward the door even as she walked toward him. "You didn't have to get me anything, Julian," she said, though her eyes lingered on the box. "We're doing the big trip later, remember?" "Open it," Julian said. He was leaning against the kitchen island, arms crossed, studying her face. Elena reached out, her manicured fingers brushing the velvet. She opened the lid. Inside lay a vintage Cartier tank watch, a piece she had admired in a window on Madison Avenue 3 years ago. On the back, Julian had engraved a single line, "Time stands still." It was a lie now, of course. Time hadn't stood still. It had run out. "Oh, Julian," she breathed, the softness in her voice almost convincing. She lifted the watch, the gold catching the dim light. "It's beautiful. You remembered." She walked over to him, turning her wrist so he could fasten the clasp. Julian touched her skin. It was warm. His hands were steady as he secured the watch, hearing the tiny mechanical tick against her pulse. He waited for it, the flinch, the hesitation, the shadow of guilt in her eyes. He waited for her to realize the weight of accepting a symbol of eternal time from a man she was actively betraying. There was nothing. She admired the watch on her wrist, smiling at her reflection in the hallway mirror. "It's perfect. Thank you, baby." She kissed him, a quick, dry pressure on his lips. Then the pivot came. "I feel terrible," she said, adjusting her coat. "But Lucas called. The lighting rig for the opening tomorrow is malfunctioning. He's panicking. I have to swing by the gallery for maybe an hour to calm him down. I promise I'll be back for cake." The lie was lazy. The gallery was closed. The lighting contractors would have gone home at 5. Julian looked at her. He looked at the watch ticking on her wrist, counting down the minutes until she would be in Lucas's arms. And in that moment, the anger that had been fueling him for weeks suddenly evaporated. It didn't explode, it just dissolved, leaving behind a hollow, echoing clarity. He didn't hate her. He realized, with a jolt of surprise, that he pitied her. He pitied the frantic way she lived, chasing a dopamine hit while burning down her foundation. He pitied the fact that she thought she was the protagonist of a romantic drama, unaware she was actually the villain in a tragedy. She thought she was getting away with it, wearing his love on her wrist while running to another man's bed. She didn't know she was wearing a shackle. "Go," Julian said. His voice was gentle, almost kind. "Don't keep him waiting. The lighting is important." Elena blinked, seemingly surprised by his easy acquiescence. "You're the best. I'll make it up to you." She grabbed her purse and hurried out the door, the click of her heels fading down the hallway. Julian stood alone in the center of the room. He didn't check the Find My app. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where she was going. He walked over to the calendar on the fridge and looked at the date. The gala, her big night, and his scheduled departure was 2 weeks away. "Happy birthday, Elena," he whispered to the empty room. He went to the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the top shelf of the closet. He didn't pack it yet. He just set it in the corner, open and waiting. It was time to start deciding what was worth taking and what was corrupted beyond repair. The gallery was a canyon of white walls and polished concrete, echoing with the sound of 300 socialites pretending to understand abstract expressionism. It was the biggest night of Elena's career, the opening of the Void and Light exhibition. Julian stood near a pillar, holding a flute of champagne that had gone warm in his hand. He was wearing his tuxedo-like armor, the bow tie tight against his throat. Across the room, Elena was radiant. She wore a backless silver gown that shimmered like liquid mercury under the gallery track lighting. She was laughing, her head thrown back, holding court in a circle of donors and critics. She looked like a queen. Julian knew he was just the consort, brought along to complete the image of stability. "She's outdone herself, hasn't she?" Julian turned. It was Lucas. The man was wearing a velvet dinner jacket, looking every bit the arrogant venture capitalist who thought he owned the room. He held a drink with a casual looseness, his eyes fixed not on Julian, but on Elena across the room. "The exhibition is impressive," Julian said, his voice flat. He didn't offer his hand. "It's more than impressive. It's a revelation," Lucas said, finally turning his gaze to Julian. There was a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, a look of amused condescension. It was the look of a man who has tasted the wine in your cellar and wants you to know he enjoyed it. "You're a lucky man, Julian. A woman with that kind of passion is rare." The double entendre hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Julian felt a muscle in his jaw jump. He wanted to smash the champagne glass into Lucas's teeth. He wanted to ask him if the passion was worth destroying a home. Instead, Julian smiled. It was a cold, shark-like smile. "Luck has nothing to do with it, Lucas. It's all about investment and knowing when to sell." Lucas frowned, the smirk faltering for a microsecond, unsure how to interpret the comment. Before he could respond, a donor pulled him away. Julian turned his back on him and moved toward the periphery of the room, needing air. He found himself near a partition wall, hidden from the main crowd by a large sculpture of twisted steel. Two women, wives of board members, women Julian and Elena had dined with for years, were standing on the other side, their voices lowered but carrying clearly in the acoustic space. Shameless, honestly. "Did you see the way Lucas looked at her during the speech?" "Everyone saw it, darling. It's getting embarrassing. Do you think Julian knows?" "Please. Men are always the last to know. He probably thinks she's working late. It's tragic, really. He's such a nice guy, but he's looking like a fool standing there while she parades her boyfriend around. I heard they spent the weekend in the Berkshires. My assistant saw them at the Red Lion Inn." Julian stood frozen behind the steel sculpture. The blood drained from his face, leaving him cold. It wasn't just a secret between him, Elena, and Lucas. It was a spectacle. Their friends knew. Their colleagues knew. The business trip lies were transparent to everyone but him. Or so they thought. He wasn't just being betrayed. He was being pitied. He was the punchline of a joke being told in every corner of this room. He looked out at the crowd. He saw the glances now, the sympathetic nods, the whispers behind hands when he walked by. They weren't smiling at him. They were watching the crash. Elena waved at him from across the room, mouthing, "I love you," for the benefit of a photographer snapping pictures of the power couple. Julian raised his glass to her. "Enjoy the applause, Elena," he thought, "because the curtain is coming down." He didn't leave the party early. He stayed until the very end. He shook every hand. He thanked every donor. He played the role of the oblivious, supportive husband to perfection. But inside, the last tether of attachment snapped. He didn't just want to leave her anymore. He wanted to vanish. He wanted to ensure that when she finally turned around to look for him, there would be nothing left but empty space and the devastating realization of what she had thrown away. The timeline in his head shifted. He wasn't going to wait for the weekend. He was leaving tomorrow. The morning was brilliant, falsely cheerful. Elena had left early, energized by the gala's success and vibrating with anticipation for her promotion announcement later that day. She kissed Julian on the cheek, humming a tune as she pulled on her gym clothes. "I'm going to run for 40 minutes, then treat myself to a blowout," she said. "I need to look phenomenal for the announcement." "You already do," Julian replied, without looking up from the counter. The lock clicked shut. Silence descended on the loft, a silence that, for the first time in months, felt like freedom rather than a burden. Julian didn't rush. He moved through the apartment with the slow, deliberate pace of a museum curator cataloging artifacts. He was only taking what was definitively his: clothing, books, tools, and the architectural sketches from his early career that were irreplaceable. He left behind everything he had bought for them: the art, the furniture, the elaborate sound system, all of it tainted. He packed the 2 suitcases he had positioned in the study. Each fold of a shirt, each wrapped book, was an act of severance. As he zipped the final bag, the sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet apartment. He walked into the bedroom. He went to Elena's jewelry box, the lacquer finish cool under his fingers. He found her wedding band and her engagement ring, which she usually only wore for public events, nestled in velvet. She had forgotten to put them on after the gym. He lifted them out. They were heavy, cold relics of a life that no longer existed. Julian walked back to the kitchen island. The marble surface where the first lie had appeared as a text notification. He placed his own wedding ring down first. Then, her engagement ring and wedding band, arranged neatly next to his. He put the keys to the loft on top of the rings. The key fob, the security card, the metal pieces representing access and ownership, all stacked up. Finally, he took the sealed manila envelope from his work bag. It was thin, but heavy with implication. The introductory letter from Harlan Gray's firm, the signed initial filing for a no-fault dissolution, and a detailed printout of the separation agreement he proposed. He set the envelope against the stack of rings and keys. Julian paused. He didn't write a note. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in the deafening silence of the past month. The unspeakable truth was now contained in the dry, sterile language of a legal document. He walked to the front door. He paused one last time, looking at the life he had built. The perfect glass and steel prison he was finally escaping. The loft felt vast and empty, already missing his presence. He picked up the 2 suitcases, their weight grounding him. He opened the door, stepped out, and pulled the door shut behind him with a soft final click. At 9:45 a.m., Julian Vance was gone. 40 minutes later, Elena returned. She walked in, her gym bag slung over her shoulder, still glowing from her workout and the excitement of the day ahead. She paused in the foyer, confused by the sudden emptiness of the apartment. The living room was too quiet. Julian's usual morning presence, the scent of his coffee, the sound of his laptop, was absent. She walked into the kitchen, a frown creasing her brow. She stopped at the island. Her eyes fell on the objects waiting there, the stack of keys, the cold gleam of the 4 rings, and the beige manila envelope propped up against them. She dropped her gym bag. It hit the marble floor with a muffled thud. Elena stared at the tableau. For a long, paralyzed moment, her mind refused to connect the dots. The rings, the keys, Julian's absence, the envelope. She reached out, her hand shaking, and picked up the envelope. She tore it open, pulling out the letter from Harlan Gray. As her eyes scanned the formal letterhead and the first line, "Dear Mrs. Vance, please be advised that we represent Julian Vance in the matter of the dissolution of your marriage." Elena's world tilted. She hadn't been expecting a proposal for a Berkshire's weekend. She hadn't been expecting congratulations for her promotion. She had been expecting life to continue exactly as it had, Julian providing the stability while she sought excitement elsewhere. She had expected to have both. Julian hadn't said a word. He hadn't fought. He hadn't accused. He had simply walked away and taken everything that mattered: his commitment, his silence, and his strategic withdrawal, leaving her with the wreckage. The shock was absolute. The hours passed in a blur of frantic, futile energy. Elena's tears dried, leaving harsh, salty streaks on her cheeks. The manila envelope lay crumpled near the wedding rings on the marble island, now stained with champagne she had nervously poured and forgotten. Her first act was to call Julian. It went straight to voicemail. She called his office. His assistant, with a voice colder than the New York air, informed her that Mr. Vance had taken an indefinite leave of absence, and all inquiries were being directed to his legal counsel. She tried texting him, a torrent of desperation. "Julian, stop this. This is a mistake. Let's talk. Don't be rash." The messages didn't deliver. Blocked. The fear solidified into panic. She hadn't just lost an argument. She had lost her anchor. Elena then called Lucas. He answered, his voice guarded, tight. "I need you to come here," she pleaded, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles were white. "Julian left. He filed for divorce. The papers are here." A pause stretched across the line, heavy with calculations. "Divorce?" Lucas finally said. "Elena, I don't know what you expected. We had an arrangement. And look, I have a major investors meeting tomorrow. I can't be seen near a scandal right now. This is complicated." "Complicated?" she whispered. "You think this is complicated? You were supposed to be here for me." "I was here for the fun, Elena," Lucas retorted, his tone sharp, professional. "This is marriage drama. You need to handle your life. Don't call me again until this is settled." He hung up. The cold dial tone was a secondary wave of betrayal, confirming that Lucas Thorne was an exciting distraction, not a refuge. He wasn't interested in the complicated, messy business of rebuilding a life. He was only interested in the beautiful facade of one. Elena stood alone in the center of the loft. The room was beautiful, but it felt hollow. Julian's absence was a physical presence, vast and heavy. She walked into the study, noting the empty space where his books had been, the faint impression of the rug where his desk chair always sat. Julian hadn't said a word because he didn't need to. Every calculated action, the secret savings transfers, the lawyer meetings, the absolute refusal to rage, had been his statement. His silence was the ultimate weapon, a slow-acting poison that allowed her to destroy herself only to feel the pain when the life support was finally switched off. She reached up, her fingers closing around the vintage Cartier watch Julian had given her. Time stands still. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. Time hadn't stood still. Julian had simply used the ticking minutes to build a fortress around his future and a trap for her past. She looked out the window at the gleaming, indifferent towers of Manhattan. The promotion she was supposed to receive that day, the pinnacle of her professional life, was now tainted, overshadowed by the incoming scandal. The pity she had overheard at the gala would turn to judgment, and the life she had so carefully constructed was now nothing but debris. Julian's revenge wasn't loud. It was surgical. And in the agonizing quiet of the empty apartment, Elena finally understood the price of her transgression. She wasn't free. She was abandoned.